James
Yes.
Norad is the director of a program, the executive director of Next Generation for Christ, author and producer of the Story of Redemption film series, which is used on 5 continents and is currently being broadcast in Croatia. He served as a lead minister in Churches of Christ in Kansas City, Dallas, Washington, D.C., gives seminars all across the country on, on strategies to reach the next generation as adjunct faculty member at Austin Graduate School of Theology, and is normally living in Chantilly, Virginia, a suburb of Washington, D.C. James is a guy who has embraced digital discipleship in an amazing way. First off, James, good morning, and tell us exactly in Croatia where you are today.
Hello, Jeff. It's great to be here. It is in the evening here, and it's wonderful to be with you. I love Pepperdine. I love you. I love Crossways, which is that great camp that my daughter's gone to, and love you squared. So right now, we are in Varaždin, Croatia, which is about an hour north of Zagreb, the capital.
Okay. Now, what are you doing right now during your time in Croatia? What takes you there?
Yeah, so well, all of our kids are online right now, so it presented a unique opportunity for us to really go anywhere because with our ministry, we already did a lot of things online, but
Right.
with the coronavirus and everything else moving to online, it presented a unique opportunity for us to go as a family and do ministry and to serve with the church here in Varaždin. And because everything global is digital, we're able to continue to do trainings and workshops and all that kind of thing still online. So, and Croatia is one of the few places in Europe that's still open to Americans. Most of Europe hasn't wanted us to come, but they love Americans here, and they're still open. And so it just happens to be a place that our family loves, and we do a lot of work in ministry at as well.
Well, I have to say, I was not too familiar with Croatia when I was invited to come and speak over there, and which didn't happen this year. I started looking up things and found it's where Game of Thrones was filmed. So it's interesting. You guys woke up one day and said, "Hey, we're gonna head off to Croatia." Well, James, tell us a little bit about your ministry, Next Generation for Christ, and the idea of digital discipleship. How did you get involved with it, and what's your understanding of digital discipleship?
Yeah, sure. Well, I think the two very much go hand in hand. In fact, we started Next Generation for Christ about, I'd say, 4 or 5 years ago, and really saw a need to help churches bridge the gap with the generation that is currently out there. And one of the big divides has been the generational divide between analog and digital. So but I'll tell you, it's a challenge to reach the next generation. This is my family. As I said, this is we're all over here right now serving. But I began to clue into this need to reach the next generation and bridge this divide. I jokingly say back when my oldest daughter Gina was 4 years old, and we actually went up to Iowa to go visit my wife's family, and I started coughing and sneezing. It wasn't the coronavirus back then, but it happened to be because I'm allergic to cats, and my mother-in-law had a lot of cats there. So anyway, we come back home, and Gina, who's a deep thinker, 4 years old, she talks to her mom. She says, "Mom, I've been thinking, I'd really like us to get a cat." And my wife said, "Well, hun, your dad's allergic to cats. We can't get a cat." She said, "Well, we could keep it outside." She said, "No, I did just run away." She said, "We could put it in the garage." She said, "We're not going to put it in the garage." Finally, she pauses. Her little wheels are turning. She says, "Mom, does everyone die?" She said, "Well, yeah, honey, eventually everyone dies." She says, "Will Dad die?" I said, "Well, yes, eventually your dad will die." She said, "If Dad dies, can I get a cat?" Well, the thing is, all of us are going to die. And the question is, are we going to pass our faith on to those that we care the most about? our children, our grandchildren, our loved ones. And I tell you, Jeff, as I talk with people in various churches and around the world, really, everyone who has a faith wants to see it passed on. But the challenge is today, it's such a different world from the world that our parents, our grandparents, great grandparents grew up in. And that's why it's such a big challenge. I mean, we probably have now alive in the church for the first time since like Methuselah, 6 generations, all together at the same time, and all having vastly different experiences. It used to be that you grew up on a farm, and what you do, your parents did, your grandparents did, and you just kind of pass down wisdom down the generations, right? But and I talk with so many parents who like no one taught them how to what age to give their kids a cell phone, and we've seen kind of the devastating effect of young kids getting too much media at too young of an age, which so we're very obviously pro technology, but obviously there's some balance there, right? And knowing and so I've seen like parents just tears streaming down because of what's happened to their kids on a negative side. But now there's so many incredible opportunities to connect with people around the world to share the gospel. So this verse has always stood out to me in this path, Jeff. Psalm 78 says, "We will tell the next generation the praiseworthy deeds of the Lord, his power and the wonders he has done.
Mhm.
He has decreed statutes for Jacob and established the law in Israel, which he commanded our ancestors to teach their children, so the next generation would know them, even the children yet to be born, and
Mm.
they in turn would tell their children." So God has always intended for the faith to be passed on from generation to generation. I like to think of this as kind of like a proto Great Commission or something like that. Um, but I doubt that God was surprised by what happened with the digital explosion uh, in this current generation. He anticipated that, and so uh, the goal of reaching the next generation is always about, okay, where are they now, and how do we make the gospel don't change it, but make it applicable today and understandable, and in a language that people can understand. And that's the big divide. I mean, whatever technology we grew up with, we're pretty comfortable with and think, is like uh, good and holy, right? I still remember I had to introduce PowerPoint at my first preaching position,
Mm.
and that was a real challenge for some people. And now today we're just saying, I mean, come on, everyone, PowerPoint. But again, whatever you grew up with, you're comfortable with. At some point, for some people, that flannel board was like some newfangled technology, right? And so it's the same today. So you just think about it. If you're familiar with and you're comfortable with Facebook, you're kind of like, oh, that Instagram stuff is, blah, blah, blah. Okay. So, and then those who grew up on Instagram, it's like TikTok. That's for, so again, it's kind of human nature to kind of atrophy and just stay where you are, and then the faith doesn't get translated and doesn't get passed on. So this analog digital divide is a huge one that's been there, but it's more than just like technology. It's also what technology brings together, which is diversity, people from all around the world. It's a very diverse generation and culture, and there's a lot of different influences. And so, for your average church member or church leaders who's maybe in their 50s, 60s, 70s, it's a really challenging thing. But people can be reached today, and we're seeing it happen all the time. And so it's actually an exciting time to be alive in a lot of different ways.
Well, what are some of the big shifts in thinking and practice, and what can our churches do to embrace this paradigm shift? I think we're all catching up and doing the COVID pivot, but you guys have kind of been out in front of the game. You were doing this digital outreach before COVID ever hit. When
Yeah.
did you actually launch the series, the scheme of or the story of redemption?
Yeah, sure. Great question. So, and I'll tell you a story on that in just a moment. from our series. So yeah, one of the things that we have is a film series called Story of Redemption that's designed to help lead people to faith. Now, I first wrote this, Jeff, actually when I was preaching in Kansas City, and we were encountering people that really didn't have much of a church background, know the Bible very well, and I was
Mm.
looking for something to share Christ with people. And I'm telling you, everything that I found, maybe it's just me, but it was like from the 1960s or 70s. It was dated in its approach, in its look. It maybe told people what to do to be saved, but it basically assumed that people knew the whole Bible and just needed a few proof texts. And so I decided to try to find some way to share the gospel. And I wrote in such a way that other people could hopefully use it. And so God bless that. And it was translated some different languages. But again, us trying to be adaptable. What happened 7, 8 years ago? Video began to just explode. Now, I also started noticing the power of video years ago. I know you've been doing video for a long time, pioneering that, Jeff. I still remember seeing your tapes at lectureships and everything, and fantastic. But we started telling stories of people who we had studied with that had come to faith,
Mhm.
and years ago. And I noticed then all the youth gathered around. They just couldn't wait. It's like they just wanted to watch it and see and hear these stories. So it's not just the medium, but it's combining biblical story, current story in a powerful medium. And now with a digital, I mean, it used to be like VCR and all that, right? Now digitally, it can just explode and go all over the world. And so, we have our series in like 30 different languages. A lot of different types of tracks: evangelism, discipleship, and English learning.
Mm.
But if I can, let me share you this one story. I think just so illustrates the power of combining discipleship with uh, digital media and digital outreach. So this woman, Ada, that's actually not her real name, but protect her identity. Ada grew up in a war-torn country in the Middle East,
Mm.
and she grew up in a family that was kind of nominally Muslim. A lot of Americans may not know that a lot of people born in Muslim countries are nominal. I mean, it's like what they're born into, but they don't know the Quran. They might know some, a few prayers or whatever it may be to fit into the culture, but don't really know it. Well, she was working as a lawyer, so she worked in Sharia law courts because that's what they had there. And she was trying to defend the rights of women. And so her family was targeted by ISIS, and one of her family members was brutally murdered. So she came to the U.S. on asylum, and she showed up at church building uh, in the D.C. area, and but the only reason why she came is because she thought that the church building was actually a library. And there was a Muslim family down the road from the church, said, "Go see those people, they'll help you with your English." So she came. She thought it was a church building. She's like, "What?" But she met a very kind woman there who worked in that ministry, and talked with her about how Jesus loved and respected women and part of his followers. And so she stayed and started studying with her and helping her with her English, and then going through the biblical story. And we just finished this film on discipleship. And I said, I think this would be a good film for Ada to watch, because in it, it talked about how Jesus called men and women, people from all backgrounds, all ethnicities, and they come together and form this loving community. And so this is the film that we watched. And if we can play this now, and then I'll tell you what happened.
Matthew tells us that as Jesus walked alongside the Sea of Galilee, he began to call his disciples, Peter, Andrew, James, and John. Now, Peter, Andrew, James, and John were fishermen, and Jesus called out to them and said, "Come, follow me, and I will take you from being fishers of fish to being fishers of people. I will send you out to fish for people. And an amazing thing happens. It says that immediately they dropped everything that they had, left behind their family business, and went and followed Jesus. And later, along the same seashore, Jesus would call Matthew a tax collector, and he too would immediately leave everything that he had and go and follow Jesus. Now, why would these men do this? It seems pretty radical. Well, to answer that question, it's helpful to understand something about the rabbi-disciple system in the first century. Every young Jewish boy grew up wanting to be a rabbi, and every young Jewish boy and girl would at least go to an elementary school called Beit Sofar, or House of the Book. And there, their job was to memorize the first 5 books of the Hebrew Bible, what we would call the Old Testament: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. And the best of the best would be able to graduate and go on to the next school of learning, a type of secondary school called Beit Talmud, or House of Learning. And their job was to memorize the rest of the Hebrew Bible. And from there, the best of that group would be allowed to apply to Beth Midrash, or House of Seeking, which was a type of Ivy League school for would-be rabbis. Now, a student would find a rabbi that he respected, someone that he wanted to be like, and he would say to that rabbi, "Rabbi, I want to follow you." Now, the rabbi's job was to question the would-be disciple, to seek to determine not whether or not he knew the scriptures, but whether or not he could imitate his teachings, become like him, and pass on his way of life. And if the student could answer the rabbi's questions to his liking, then he would say to him, "Come, follow me." And these were the words that every student longed to hear. And he would leave behind his family, his job, his vocation, and he would go and become the disciple of that rabbi. Now, if the student didn't quite make the cut, the rabbi would say, "Ah, my son, you know the Torah, you know the teaching well, but I'm afraid that you cannot be my disciple. Go home, make babies, and pray that they become rabbis." Now, the very fact that in the gospel accounts these men are fishermen, it shows that they were not the best of the best, that they did not make the cut. And so when Jesus, a respected teacher of the law, a teacher of God's word, comes along and says, "Come, follow me," they can hardly believe it. And so they leave everything behind and they go and follow Jesus. Now, what Jesus was saying through this was what every rabbi who said this was saying. He believed that you could become like him. And that's one of the amazing things about Jesus' call to us as his disciple. It's not based upon how much scripture we know. It's not based upon whether or not we have it all memorized. Jesus would call all kinds of people to him from all kinds of backgrounds: men, women, rich, poor, all ethnicities, all races. And his requirement to be a disciple was this: do you have in your heart a desire to follow him? And so many people came and became followers of Jesus. And Jesus would form around himself a loving, Christ-centered community that would be unlike any community that had ever existed. And that community would become the church. And along these waters, Jesus would further teach his disciples and shape them into his image and help them become like him. And he would send them out on mission, for at the heart of being a disciple of Jesus is sharing Christ with others and becoming fishers of people. Faith is a choice, and so is who we follow. We can choose to follow others, we can choose to follow our own path, or we can choose to follow Jesus. If we want to follow Jesus, Jesus says, "Come, follow me." We must choose him, but he has already chosen us. So now, how about you? Where are you in following Jesus? Where are you on the path of discipleship? What benefit do you see in being part of a loving, Christ-centered community? And who can you share Christ with today?
Okay.
Wow, James, that is amazing. How many are there of those type things in the series?
Well, there's 52 films, and we've got evangelism tracks, discipleship tracks, and English language tracks, and it's available in 30 different languages.
Mm.
But I'll just tell you briefly what she said after watching that. You're kind of waiting because she looked like she was paying attention, right? But then you're waiting, what's she going to say? And she paused, and finally she said, "From watching that video, I felt a peace come over me like that I've never felt before."
Hmm.
Then she said, "I can see now that I can have a family here and a future." And then she said, "I don't want to be Muslim anymore. I want to follow Jesus." And a few months later, I got a text from her saying that she wanted to be baptized into Christ. Of course, I had all these appointments, but I rearranged some things, flew back early, and baptized her into Christ, which was amazing. But she'd probably never seen a baptism before or know what one was typically like. Because when she came up out of the water, she started giving a speech about why she believed in Jesus. And so one of the most inspiring things. But I think when we talk about what is discipleship, it's all these things. It's about following Jesus, obviously, first and foremost, but it's also about making disciples of others. And if you go back and you look at the Great Commission, go and baptize and teach, almost all the definitions of discipleships that are popular out there, it's about becoming more devoted and more, and it's like it becomes like these internal Bible study groups where people memorize more and more scripture. That, hey, that's great to do, but that's not what the Great Commission, that's incomplete at very best for the Great Commission. It's to go out. He says, "Come follow me, and I will" what? "Make you fishers of people." It didn't say, "I'll make you great Bible students or even great worshipers." It's interesting what he does say. "I'll make you fishers of people." And so it has to have this outward thrust to it, not exclusively, but disciple making. And churches that don't do this develop these diseases, right? But when you're reaching out, reaching others, it's exciting, and it's exciting to be a part of. And the great thing is now with everything that's digital, there is so much that can be done. You don't have young people directly in your church. Guess what? You can put up an ad on Facebook right now, and you can instantly have young people from your community or from around the world that will potentially respond. This is what digital allows us to do, is to draw resources from all kinds of different places. So I think there's some practical things that I could highlight here, Jeff, and just run through with y'all today that might be of help and encouragement to people.
Well, as you're preparing to do that, James, I really resonate with the challenge of an either or kind of discipleship, that somehow we've gotten this concept of discipleship being I know more, I know more, I know more. But if that becomes internal, if that just becomes our little small group that is constantly trying to grow more like Jesus, but never has any friends or guests or outreach, then we're paralyzed. How do you help churches break out of that kind of discipleship that's just for us?
Yeah. So for that part, let me tell you that there are three basic things. First of all, we've got to go back to the biblical basis for mission and discipleship. Our people respect Scripture, rightfully so. So this is not some radical thing, but it is saying, look, we've got to get back to the mission of the church, to making disciples of Jesus Christ, focusing on that as what's primary. And so relay that foundation. A second we've got to educate people about what's going on culturally. We can't assume people know. Now, we used to always have to explain what Zoom was in our ministry. Now, everyone knows what Zoom is. We've been forced to know what it is. But one of the things we do is like put the generations together, all six, and and like whole church seminars, and have them hear from each other and what's been important, what shaped them, and what's the most important events, and why is TikTok important, or why does every boomer know where they were when JFK was shot, etc. And then practical strategies, tools, and resources to get people there, because otherwise you just create a lot of guilt. Okay, you tell me I'm supposed to reach out to these people that I have no idea how to reach, and yet another thing that I feel like I'm failing at. So you have to equip people and train people. That's what Jesus did.
James, let me do something now I should have done at the beginning and invite all our Zoom call members. Use the chat line, because in a moment I'm going to ask Tammy to help me go through the chat line and look at questions that you would like to ask. James has challenged us about discipleship, shown us an interesting tool, but also challenged us about how do we do that in our setting. What question would you like to ask James? And if you'll put that in the chat line, we'll use that for a place where we can get questions answered. Go ahead, James.
Yeah, sure. Let me run through some real practical things that you can do. Of course, we've been training churches in digital discipleship through Zoom during this time. But first of all, be hospitable with online worship, website, and social media. So all these people tuning on online, right? You need the same thing as you do in the real world. You need like online greeters and people who are actively looking for those new people who show up, inviting them into a Zoom group. And then your website and your social media need to be current. I mean, I just say that's like ought to be a no-brainer. But again, where so many churches, it's like 95% of your people, if they are going to check out a church, they're going to check that out before they ever get through the front door. So, but you need these hospitality ministries online. And there's
James,
some
can I ask, what is an
Yeah.
online greeter? I'm just trying to envision
Yeah.
this deacon in the lobby. What does an online greeter look like?
Yeah. Okay, so when you live stream, you can have people say hello, etc. And so they're looking for some visitor shows up, says hello. Oh, good to meet you. Invite them into something. You need to have online invitations, like to all of those who tune in the first time. We've got this Zoom chat where you can say hello and kind of have a virtual coffee for 5 minutes. So people who are looking to connect, you have to give them those online opportunities to do that. And some micro studies have shown that, yeah, while a lot of people are checking out multiple services like Christians, there are also people kind of particularly along family lines that are checking out church services for the first time. So these are opportunities. Don't let that go to waste. Use that opportunity there. Reach out to young adults. If we're not reaching out to young adults now, we're never going to, because this is like their medium. So we hired like 4 interns this summer. They did a fantastic job. They know every free resource that you've ever thought of, Williams, because all of, I mean, not these, but all of them are broke. They don't have any money. So I'm just speaking generically. But one of the things we had them do is invite their friends into a Bible study. 20 young adults said yes. My daughter Gina invited 10 of her friends, and they all 10 said yes. Now imagine if every church across America did this. Would we not reach more people for Christ? But we're not even hardly asking. You can do this in your neighborhood. I mean, I'm studying with our Chinese neighbor, our neighbor who's from China, others that are being studied with as well. They're very open and receptive. You can advertise again through Facebook, and you could use our series. You can use whatever you like, but conversational English within a 5 or 15 mile radius of your church building. Spend $300 and see what you get. In the DC area, we advertise out in a radius from one of the churches there, and we had like 45 people sign up that they wanted to practice English using the Bible, using the story of redemption.
Okay, now when you say advertise, you're not talking about a billboard on the roadside. Can you give us 3 sentences on how
Yeah.
you're advertising?
Yeah, just go to Facebook page. You've got a simple picture of someone like, like one of these, like this guy here with a laptop and kind of
Yeah.
talking to someone, right? Free conversational English using Bible or using the story of redemption. And then you can micro target that. You select your audience. I want people within uh, 10-mile radius of this location, and you put in some funds and you'll start getting potentially supply replies. Metropolitan areas, obviously there's going to be a greater concentration of probably people of different ethnicities that may need that more, but so it may not hit every single group, but there's a huge potential there. But most churches aren't doing it. And there's people that will show up. My oldest daughter is studying with two, she and one of her friends are studying with two wonderful young women from India. And they had this great conversation about the afterlife. They found out that in their version of Hinduism, that women had no afterlife. Now, you want to talk about something that disciples your teens, have them study with someone and they get that. There is a difference between Christianity and other religions. And one other religion, the women don't even they cease to exist at their death. So,
Yeah.
but do you know that those conversations are happening? They're interested increasingly, not just in English, but also in God and faith and conversations about Christ. So
Okay.
again, this is the opportunity that's out there if we'll take advantage of it. Spanish obviously is a huge people group that can be reached out to, and then partner with your local missionaries. Your overseas missionaries. So you can now bridge the gap overseas, and you can use them. If you've got a Spanish speaking missionary, you can use them to help reach your local Spanish population, or you can help them reach people by helping them practice English. So there's these amazing opportunities right now, or we can decide to do nothing.
Now, I note that somebody asked James, they said, hey, I'm in a Zoom group, but it's morphed into just the same people all the time, same place, Taco Bell. So how do I
Right.
encourage them to reach out via Zoom? Would you give a word of advice to somebody who says, I've got this, but I'm trying to get that?
Yeah. Well, you've got to motivate your people to care about the lost and care about reaching out. That takes conviction from the word. It takes inspiring people. It takes hearing stories of people coming to faith. That's one of the things that I love doing, is trying to look, people can be reached today. People need hope. It's like they've tried maybe the same old thing, or they just stopped trying. And so they need to know that, man, somewhere, some way this is working, and people are being reached. That's what. Isn't it fantastic for a young adult to invite 10 of her friends and all 10 of them say yes to studying? So they need to hear these stories of God at work. This is one of the most encouraging things to people. And then it takes leadership, Jeff.
Yeah.
A lone deacon or ministry leader is not going to cut it. It all comes down to, they've got to hear it from the preacher. They've got the elders, all the Bible. It's got to be
Right.
And people will follow leadership. If you treat it as a side ministry that, one small, niche of the church is doing, some youth guy in the basement, then that's what you're going to get. But if you say, hey, this is the Great Commission now, God can do a lot with that.
Okay. James, how about this? Somebody asked about passive learning. They say, this stuff is passive learning. Do you have thoughts about, or can you speak to what active modeling digital discipleship looks like? How do you break past the passivity of that this might be?
That when you're doing something online that is passive?
Yeah.
Okay, that's a great question. So for instance, like in our series, each video is about 6 minutes long. And then there's discussion questions, all right, which is interactive. So yeah, I remember one church, they had tried to do small group. They were watching hour-long videos on Sunday night. I'm like, oh my goodness, the kids and everything else. It's like, how did that work? Well, not so great, right? And it's not that people won't sit through certain things, but there are some things that some formats are better than others. So short online type of video where there is discussion and interaction, that's really what the medium lends itself towards. And that's one of the great things about Zoom. I mean, more and more when doing seminars and stuff, there's within a pretty short amount of time, we'll go into breakout groups because people have something that they want to share and contribute and all that kind of thing. And so there's amazing opportunities for that. But again, there's little training in this. And so what typically happens is someone who's been used to kind of lecturing anyway, and in the real world gets up and they give a hour-long, Zoom session lecture. And it's just really hard. No matter how good the content or whatever, or how dynamic the person is, there's some formats that it lends itself towards things that are more interactive. And so you have to build that into the curriculum.
Okay, well, you've convicted me today. Here we've been doing all these E-squareds that are basically passive, and so, oh man! But what you're saying is so true. Now, let me shoot you a different question that I see somebody's been asking here. Somebody says, our older folks are kind of getting into Zoom, but our youngest students are like, no more Zoom. I mean, Zoom and hell are both four-letter words, and there are many students in America who have connected those two strongly.
Yeah.
Are you seeing this? Somebody else says, hey, nobody under 25 is on Facebook anymore. I'm just curious what you're seeing about it.
Yeah. Well, first of all, you and I talking at least is interactive, right? So, but yeah, it obviously there are studies on Zoom fatigue. That's a real phenomenon. And the medium is always going to be potentially changing, right? Because whatever was hip for one generation is gonna filter down. So if Facebook moved more down to Instagram for younger generation, et cetera. So that's which means you got to keep up, right?
Yeah.
But that's why you stay in contact and you put young people within your leadership team circle, etc. So for instance, we do seminars, we'll do this next gen team that's a cross section that has some established people, but then has young adults in it and maybe even a teenager in there, so that you can hear their perspective, because you can't get them without them opening the door. I mean, probably all the older people tried just planning adults for young people, and no one shows up. I mean, they're creators, so have them put it together. Not by themselves. They actually don't want that. They want mentors. They want you to come along with them, and they're gonna need you there, but they need to feel like they are helping co-create this. And that will take away a lot of the, people will show up to something that they're vested in. They won't buy into something that they haven't participated in. And so if they participated, if they've helped come up with the thing, let them help deal with the Zoom fatigue, all that kind of stuff. They will come up, believe me, they will show up to things that are meaningful to them and that bring them life. They'll do that.
Okay.
Now they don't want things that don't.
on the other end of the stick, I believe it's Jason Hollinger who is pretty open and says, okay, what about those folks who have thought, man, I want to stay off of social media. I want to have a safe space. By the way, everybody on the call, if you have not seen Social Dilemma, it is a documentary you must watch. It is challenging. It will make you take your phone and chuck it out the window kind of thing, or at the very least do things like I will not look at my phone until. And so here we are leaning into digital discipleship. At the same time, some are saying a real disciple of Christ is going to be very careful with this nasty little thing. And so speak to that a moment, if you would, James.
Yeah. Well, I say Jesus is the model, right? And you can say the same thing about the earth. It's an icky place. Why would you want to go there? Heaven's a lot nicer, and I like to keep myself pure. So it's always the tension between the in the world but not of the world, right?
Mhm.
And we can be a light on social media. And for myself, I stay away from politics on social media because immediately I don't want to alienate half the population.
That's right.
And it doesn't matter what you say; that's what's going to happen. I want to stay focused on Christ. I want to show God's love. I want people to see that I'm a blessing, hopefully, and hopefully through that they will maybe not see me at all, that they'll see Christ. And so, if the world is in the digital space and we're not there, then it's really becomes a very dark place. And so Jesus said, I came that you might have life, and he was the light of the world. So I think it means that we need to be a presence there. Wherever technology goes, at least we've got to consider how can we bring the gospel into that space.
Amen. Amen. Amen.
How can we bring hope and good news to people where they are? And if we don't do that, it seems like we're failing to imitate Christ. We're not being very good disciples, right? If we stay away, Jesus got criticism, right? Because he was hanging out with the sinners and the prostitutes. Why would you want to be with them? So I get the concern. We don't want to be in the world entirely, of the world entirely, but we want to be in it, and we want to share Christ in that space.
Good point. I appreciate the Christology in that of what happened in the incarnation. Because I had somebody say, would Jesus be on social media? And I'm thinking, wow, I can only imagine. I heard an old preacher once say every form of transportation in Jesus's day he used. He rode on a donkey, he was on a boat, he walked, and I think you're right, and it's a challenge to us. So thank you, James, and God bless the next generation for Christ.